The parole hearing of convicted murderer Oscar Pistorius kicks off this hour at Atteridgeville Correctional Centre. This comes at 10 years after he shot and killed his then-girlfriend Reeva Steenkamp. The murder and ensuing criminal trial of the Paralympian sent shockwaves through South Africa and beyond. Newzroom Afrika Erin Bates is standing by. Erin, good morning. Pistorius has applied for parole before, obtained it, and it has been revoked. What's changed?
Yes, Hugo, that's right. What's changed is that time has passed. That parole granted and then revoked in 2015. Now Pistorius up before the parole board again. And in fact, just minutes ago, June Steenkamp, Reeva Steenkamp's mother, of course, the bereaved parent or one of them of Oscar Pistorius' victim in that shooting in 2013, arriving here at Atteridgeville Correctional Centre for this parole board hearing this morning. We heard a little earlier from Tanya Kun. She's the spokesperson for the Steenkamp family, and she's reflected on what it's been like for Reeva's family over the last decade, having lost her in that fateful night in February of 2013. Let's take a listen.
10 years to us, it sounds so long in time, but for them, it's 10 missed birthdays, it's 10 Mother's Day, Father's Day, Christmases. So time hasn't healed for them. They've learned to an extent to get used to the idea of her not being there, but they miss her every day.
Hugo, echoes a little bit of the Pistorius trial here with a media scrum toward the vehicle carrying June Steenkamp this morning. She didn't comment, but Kun reflected on a meeting between Barry Steenkamp and Oscar Pistorius in this very facility last year. It's the view of Steenkamp's family, her parents in particular, that the trigger man, Oscar Pistorius, the Blade Runner, has not shown remorse, that he isn't contrite, and he should be denied bail. Now, I've spoken to some attorneys with experience in parole board hearings. They've emphasized the correctional nature of the punitive or legal system, the criminal system in South Africa, that it seeks to correct offenders, it seeks to rehabilitate them and integrate them into society. Those are the kinds of themes that will be on the mind of the parole board collectively today as it runs its hearing. It will hear from June Steenkamp, it will hear from Pistorius and others, and Ulrich Roux, a leading attorney in Johannesburg, reflected on what could happen if, and that's the big catch, Hugo, if Pistorius were to be granted parole. Let's take a listen.
The murder was committed in 2013, but he was only effectively sentenced in November 2017 by the Supreme Court of Appeal. His sentence was one of 15 years imprisonment, but at that stage he had already served 1.5 years when he was completing his sentence handed down by the High Court. Our Department of Correctional Services and our Parole Board Act confirms that you need to serve half of your sentence, in this instance 7.5 years, before you can become eligible for parole. You can then launch an application to be released on parole, and that application is heard by what we refer to as the Parole Board. It is a board comprised of experienced and senior members within the Department of Correctional Services, as well as members from society, could be psychologists, psychiatrists, and then other employees of the Department of Correctional Services.
Erin, it's been 10 years since that fateful day in February when Reeva Steenkamp lost her life, but 7 years since Oscar was put behind bars. What do we know about his state in the last 7 years?
Yes, certainly. So Oscar served about 7+ years of his murder sentence for shooting Reeva Steenkamp through that locked bathroom door. We heard during the trial that she was standing in a defensive position. She was not seated. She was standing upright. And the bullets in his firearm were a particular kind of bullet that wreaks a lot of havoc. They work almost like shrapnel, ripping through one's body. So you can understand the kind of distress that the Steenkamp family and indeed the Pistorius family may be going through on a day like today. What I have heard from sources close to Pistorius and his family is that The last few years incarcerated have taken a toll. He is not the same man who we saw during the criminal trial, during the proceedings around mitigation of sentence, that he is in some ways a shadow of himself. And certainly the attorneys I've spoken to have said that time in correctional services change people for better or for worse. What needs to be determined by the parole board here is whether he is contrite, whether he has shown that he takes responsibility for his actions, for the murder of Reeva Steenkamp, the law graduate and South African model who had a rising career at the time, and whether he can contribute constructively to society moving forward. Those are the parameters in terms of the legal framework in South Africa. But as far as the Steenkamps are concerned, it's a hard no. They don't want him to serve the rest of his sentence at home, perhaps under house arrest with certain controls in place by correctional services. They believe he should be mulcted with the remaining time behind bars until the end of his sentence in 2030.
Erin Bates tracking the Oscar Pistorius parole hearing. Appreciate your time at this morning.